what's up guys? It's Courtney from Willow's Bloom and I am super excited today to talk to you about this video because this is something that I see very, very commonly in the spiritual community, and this is a highly sensitive person. So we're going to talk about what that means, how to tell if you are a highly sensitive person according to astrology, and we're going to look at some examples later which shows the correlation between creative people and highly sensitive people and how that can affect you in life. So stay tuned. Okay, so as an astrologer, one of the most important things I'm looking for with a highly sensitive person is a prominent Neptune. And this is often going to be a Neptune that is on an angle. So this could be like the first house, especially the ascendant, even sometimes the angles like the descendant and the midheaven. But more typically, I will see this on the IC, which is the fourth house cusp or the fourth house, and the ascendant or the rising sign. So whenever you see a Neptune that looks like this, that's when you know that you have definitely a highly sensitive personality or porous type of energy. This is also true if Neptune is in the first house in general. This is definitely going to be the case. I see this all the time with my clients and my friends. When they have Neptune in the first house, they tend to be people that are, again, porous, sensitive, and they are more likely to also receive projections from other people because the first house and the ascendant have a lot to do with how other people perceive us and what they think about us. And Neptune is such a kind of weird, reflective planet that it doesn't have necessarily its own boundaries, its own sense of self. And so being on the ascendant like that or in the first house, people will sometimes project their ideas of who you are onto you. Neptune also, especially in aspect to the personal planets. And this is going to be really strong if it's a conjunction, but it could also be the case for squares, oppositions, even sextiles and trines. So the personal planets are the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus. So if you have Neptune in aspect to these planets, especially a tight orb like 6 degrees, 5 degrees and less, especially conjunctions, and maybe honestly all of the aspects, but conjunctions are going to be the most potent. You're definitely going to be highly sensitive, and at the very least in that area of life that planet is pertaining to. But usually that carries over into multiple areas of life. You can also be highly sensitive if you have Neptune in the kind of emotional houses, and this would be the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th house. So I will often see people with Neptune here, if they are, whether they are aware of it or not, can be quite sensitive, especially to their environment. They can also be just generally like higher levels of emotion. And we're going to talk about what that actually looks like for a highly sensitive person in general. But if there's any way I can describe Neptune in regards to our emotions, it's this feeling of overwhelm. And that's something that I think many of us experience as a highly sensitive person, is a sense of overwhelm emotionally at times. You are also highly sensitive if you have lots of water in your chart. And I believe that I have a video already on YouTube talking about your elemental balance and how to find that. If not, then comment down below and I will actually post the video that I made for my astrology course on YouTube so you guys can check out how to figure out what elements you have the most of. But when I was looking at famous people's charts who were highly sensitive, I noticed that they, not only would they have a lot of water, but they typically would lack a lot of earth. And this is the problem with this, or this can be a problem, I should say, with highly sensitive people, is that sometimes it's amazing what water can do, which is helping you tap into your intuition, emotions, feelings, senses. But then when you don't have the earth, like the grounded, the practical, it can make it hard to sometimes be here on earth. And that I think is a really common theme for highly sensitive people. If you have lots of planets in the 12th house, then you are likely highly sensitive. If you have planets making really strong aspects to Chiron, especially your sun, your moon, or your rising sign, or your planet that's in charge of your rising sign or rules your rising sign is aspecting Chiron, then you are definitely likely to be more sensitive and empathetic, especially to other people's pain, because Chiron is an asteroid associated with our wounding from childhood, from past lives. And so if you have a personal planet making an aspect to this, It's almost like you were somehow born into this lifetime with a really strong connection to your own pain, and to understanding your own pain and to kind of carrying some of that forward. And because of that, you have a very strong healing ability and connection to others' pain. And I'm going to do another video on how to know if you're a healer and Chiron in an astrology chart, because that's something I see very commonly in the people that are attracted to me and my work. They will typically be healers and they will have a very strong Chiron. Also, if you're highly sensitive, if you have a strong Pluto, especially a Pluto aspecting your moon, that's typically the case. I don't always necessarily see this with like just Pluto anywhere in the chart. I really feel like it has to be in contact with the moon. And that's because the moon is our emotional regulation, and Pluto creates a high level of intensity. So you're not just experiencing emotions, you're experiencing these mass volumes of that emotion when Pluto is in contact. Especially if you have some type of square, conjunction, or opposition, it might feel like that overwhelm that often strong Neptune placements can feel. So this is a big one. And sometimes though, you might not have full awareness of even over like how you feel fully. And that's also, Neptune can also bring that into the equation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But there's some element of confusion that these planets can bring, even though it brings more intensity as well. And so I'll talk about that later. So those are the main aspects that I look for when I think, okay, this person is highly sensitive or not. Like how are they handling things? I'm going to look for those aspects in their chart. And just to relist them, it's strong Neptune placements, which is especially true for aspects to your personal planets in the first house, and doubly so if it aspects your moon, and maybe also the 4th, 8th, and 12th house. If you have lots of water in your chart, especially if you have a Neptune like that combined with lots of water, and let's say Pluto on your moon, then you're definitely going to be maybe at times crippled with how much feelings you can have, how much empathy you can have for other people. And then I also look for planets in the 12th. This is because the 12th house is just already kind of psychic and spiritual and sensitive in nature. And so if you have lots of planets there, it can make it harder to kind of assimilate into this world. The 12th house is the house where we are between that liminal state of heaven and being born. And so it's almost like you kind of get stuck, like some planets get stuck in that state and don't fully come down to the dense earth energy. And so that's why you can be really sensitive with that Chiron aspects and Pluto moon aspects. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about why Neptune is a planet that makes us highly sensitive, because it is a very spiritual planet. You'll hear lots of people say it's extremely creative and imaginative. It's very common in actors, and those are the people that I'm going to be talking about later on in this video. They all have a strong Neptune and they're all actors. And basically what Neptune allows us to do is it allows us to plug in and connect to universal consciousness. And this means that every thought, every feeling, every kind of energetic shift in the world is all, let's say, being stored up in the ether somewhere. And we have like a little cord, like avatar, that is from your belly button or something, or your tail or whatever, that plugs into that, and we can feel what is happening there. So what's really powerful about this is that you then can get creative ideas and downloads that are truly not yours, that's just coming from the ether, that are incredible. And they allow you in many ways, especially if you have a very strong Neptune without a lot of trauma attached to it, they allow you to become more of an open channel, and just kind of facilitate communication between the world and the ether in a really powerful way. And you can take on different identities even, because you can plug into an entirely different emotional experience. You can plug into somebody else's life. And this is why there's so much empathy for highly sensitive people, because they literally have more mirror neurons, which is basically the part of our brain that is able to kind of see ourselves in others and have empathy with others. And you'll notice that there are people who are maybe like psychopaths or on the spectrum who might lack some of those physical mirror neurons, which is really, really interesting. But it's like the mirrorness, like we're able to see ourselves in that person. And I think many of us can do that so much with Neptune that we take on emotions and we actually struggle with boundaries, we start taking in a lot of information. And this is also true for the world around us. So not only can we be plugged into the ether, but we can also be plugged into the environment around us and take in a lot of extra sensory information. So for a normal person, when they're really grounded into the earth, they might just kind of see and feel what's in front of them, what they're interacting with. But somebody with a strong Neptune is always sort of interacting with an energetic level of existence as well as a physical existence. So they're going to hear more things. They're going to notice the subtle shifts. Like they're going to notice if a candle is starting to smell like it's burning differently, it's getting low on the wick and it's disrupting them. Or they're going to notice if that candle has extra chemicals, because Neptune makes us extremely sensitive to our environmental toxins as well as just emotions of people around us. So if we felt like we walk into a room and we look at a couple, we can immediately tell they just had a fight. They're unhappy. She wants to leave him. And it's not like we're making up stories, even though Neptune can sometimes do that. It's that we can feel the energy around these people. We can pick up on auras sometimes. If you're really trying to hone in on this skill, you might be able to do Reiki and things of that nature, because you are literally picking up on what's here physically, and then again the energetic imprint of that, which extends much further. And so typically people who are highly sensitive, who have a strong Neptune like this, can be honestly really affected by their environment and overwhelmed by their environment. So if they go into a really big crowd of people, they can be just extremely overwhelmed because there's so many sounds or so many smells or so many feelings, and all of it's kind of like attacking them at once. And that's the thing with Neptune is, again, it lacks a sense of boundaries because it helps us become one with everything around us. It helps us have complete and total unconditional love, to see people on a soul level. So we're bringing a piece of heaven down onto this earth, and it becomes really difficult to function in that way because life is so dense and life can be so cruel. And somebody with a really strong Neptune, they have one foot in this etheric realm, and it's very hard for them to assimilate to the harsh reality of the horrible things that can happen on earth at times. And so people who are highly sensitive, not only are they picking up on all of it, but they tend to have trouble with distinguishing like what is mine, what is theirs. All of it can come in and it can affect them. It can make them confused. It can also make us have a harder time really distinguishing like who we can truly trust, and which is crazy because highly sensitive people tend to have a very strong intuition. So they'll kind of have a gut feeling or an instinct about people that they can follow, especially if you have Pluto involved in this, because Pluto is usually like very aware of people psychologically. But at the same time, this might not be true with Pluto necessarily, but with Neptune, the individual can see them on a soul level. And so it's easy to just like see that soul and not necessarily always see what's right in front of you. And I'm going to talk more about that. That's kind of the whole topic of limerence, which is really interesting. And I think somebody requested that, but if you're interested in that, definitely comment down below and I'll do a video on limerence. But regardless, highly sensitive people are operating on that soul level plane. So they have this just unconditional love and compassion for people, which shows their empathy, and they can literally plug into that emotional experience, like I said, and experience it for themselves. So it can be just really, really overwhelming. So if you walk into a room and you notice that the lighting is off, or the smell is weird, or that the textures and images and things and colors in there don't really go together, you will be actually affected by that. Like it will disrupt your way of kind of regulating. And that's the thing that's really common with highly sensitive people, is that dysregulation is just much more likely to happen because there is so much that you're taking in that's hard to distinguish and have boundaries around. You are just, again, more porous and sensitive to what's around you. And so it can feel like an information overload, and it can just get super overwhelming that you become emotionally dysregulated. This is also true if you are sensitive to things like caffeine. Like somebody who has a strong Neptune, for example, will take a drug or will take caffeine or will smoke weed for their first time, and they will just be completely obliterated by that thing. The coffee will make them shake. The weed will make them feel like they're dying and that they're paranoid. This is because these people will typically have a more sensitive immune system. So if you have like dyes and things that you're fragrances, things that you're using in your detergent, like you will be affected by those things on a much deeper level, especially if you have Neptune in the fourth or Neptune in the sixth, where you're very much affected by like your home and physical environment. So just watch out for that, like air pollution, toxins, all those things for a highly sensitive person is quite literally affecting you on a deeper level. You will also be more disturbed by violence. So for example, like I watched Game of Thrones, and the more it just affected me so much, and I wanted to watch this new season. And the more that I've been working on my opening up spiritually, I cannot watch it. I like literally cannot sit down and watch something that violent, that graphic. And that's how people feel when they're highly sensitive. They tend to be just feeling into the plants. They feel into the animals. They're often vegans or vegetarians, or they at least connect with their food. They're very intentional. They don't feel like they can just play super graphic video games and watch super graphic movies, because they're affected by suffering of other individuals and other living entities and consciousness. And they are more affected by, I feel like, the suffering of the planet in general. So like the planet deteriorating, becoming unhealthy, they are more affected in those instances because they're just more in tune with it. They're just noticing it more around them. They're more emotionally disturbed by those experiences of witnessing it. They also will tend to have big emotions that can feel like a tidal wave. And this is something that I've worked a lot with my therapist on, where those emotions can overwhelm us and become us. So all those bad things outside of us become bad things inside of us, and we have a really hard time distinguishing between the outside, the inside. Everything kind of just turns into this black hole of just intense emotional experience. And sometimes Neptune will get to the point where it has to kind of detach and escape or shut down or do some kind of, again, escapist method, because it becomes so overwhelming. This is especially true for people who've grown up as highly sensitive people in an environment or family that wasn't conducive to a highly sensitive person. And I cannot tell you how common this is. It's honestly crazy to me how much I've seen this, especially with spiritual people who kind of grow up in this environment where they had family that wasn't spiritual, or they had family that was just like, work hard, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of the day, they don't realize that you can't just sit down and work 8 hours a day. Like you can get, if something happens, you get emotionally dysregulated, you lose energy, you don't have like the full capacity all the time to just sit and grind and just put your head down. That's not how a highly sensitive person works. I feel like they need the balance of structure with flow. And this is one of the hardest things a highly sensitive person can learn, is a balance of structure with flow. Like, how do we emotionally regulate and take care of ourselves while also getting things done without it becoming rigid or too controlling or too forced? Because a highly sensitive person is naturally creative. Again, they're plugging into the ether. They are meant to channel messages, and you can't force something like that. You can't just sit down and practically like grunt your way through some work like that. This is a very flow-oriented, feminine type of way that is just not necessarily aligned with the rest of society. And when you grow up with a family like that, for example, it becomes really hard because you're taught one way to be. That's the way that people value. That's the way that people function. And then you're different. And you're like, well, how the fuck do I do this? How do I figure out how to fit into this world? And that's why I'm so passionate about creating a space for spiritual entrepreneurs, because we are our own breed and we need to make our own type of day and schedule, because it's just the rest of the world does not necessarily suit the highly sensitive person and their way of functioning. Really what we need is more alone time. We need more quiet. We need more space. And this is something I've noticed, that the more I've become in tune with my own sensitivity, I've needed more and more and more and more of this. And it's because Neptune will, again, take on everything around us. And so in order to get actually in tune with who we are, how we feel, what we want, what's really going on inside of us, we have to separate from the things that are stimulus around us. And that could be relationships and and jobs and tasks and thoughts. It's like we have to sit down and actually take a moment of peace and quiet and calm and meditate and allow ourselves to kind of detach from the world that we're experiencing. Otherwise, if we're just constantly being hammered with information and sensory input, it's just really deteriorating mentally and emotionally on our well-being. So, as I mentioned, one of the things that happens I see so much is that highly sensitive people tend to grow up in environments that are not conducive to their sensitive nature. I, for example, was one of those people, but it's ironic because my mom, I definitely know is highly sensitive, but just kind of refuses to acknowledge it. Like, I don't necessarily know that I don't think she knows that she's highly sensitive. And that is difficult too, because when there are people around you who are sensitive, who don't know they're sensitive, it's like they're not coping properly because they don't know actually what they need. And then you get put in that situation where you're expected to live like they do. And it just becomes really difficult. And there's often really traumatic experiences. And those who are highly sensitive are more impacted by those traumatic experiences, even if they're little small things along the way, like complex PTSD, where it's not one big instance, but more of like a lot of micro traumas that add up into this really complicated emotional experience. I find that highly sensitive people are a lot more reactive to that. They're a lot more impacted by that because we, again, really take things in. The good news is, though, that we're also more reactive to treatments, to healing modalities, so things that can actually help us let go of some of those things from the past. So we are really quick learners, we're really adaptive, we really take in information, we're porous and we're willing to learn in many ways. And so that is a benefit for us as we get older. So let's talk about some of the gifts of a highly sensitive person, and then we can go ahead and get into the charts of these celebrities. Okay, so if you're highly sensitive, the odds are that you are actually a lot better at paying attention to detail. And this is because you, again, have basically have a greater capacity to take in information and senses. So this can actually really benefit you in the workplace because you will notice when there are subtle shifts in things. So I mentioned this with like the candle and the lighting, and you can also notice this emotionally with people. And so this is why people who are highly sensitive often make really great creatives and healers, not only because they can plug into the ether to get these divine downloads, but also because they can create something that has an emotional expression to it. They can help other people process their emotions. They can notice when people need something that maybe that individual actually doesn't know that they need themselves. And they're just so compassionate, empathetic, and understanding and gentle in this process. And so we really need highly sensitive people because honestly, the world would be a fucked up place without us. And so we just have to learn how to basically find our own path in this life and in this world. And one of the biggest things that highly sensitive people need to do is learn how to widen their emotional trigger points. So basically, this is especially true because I feel like there is a pretty strong link between highly sensitive people and traumatic childhoods. I don't know if it's just kind of the name of the game or what we chose here as souls. I don't know. But what I often find is that there is a strong correlation there. And so there will be more trigger points. So like things can set you off easier. Things can overly make you more emotionally overwhelmed easier than other people. There are more sensitive points, trigger points around you. Like if you imagine these little like red dots all around you, they're right up on your skin, they're right up on your body. And what we need to do is find a way to have more inner space and capacity to push those red dots out so that we can start to let things slide away a little bit easier. We can start to let things not come inside of us and emotionally overwhelm us as easily. And that's going to be especially important for us to learn how to separate from these emotional experiences and become more of a witness to them rather than becoming them and allowing it to, again, really fill us from the inside out and feel a little bit overwhelming. And then the other thing I think we really need to practice is structure without forcing and flow without passivity. And I think that's a really key thing here because sometimes Neptune and highly sensitive people can kind of go a little bit towards passivity and they can be sometimes a little bit insecure. And I've noticed this a lot with The energy of Neptune as well is it tends to bring a lot of confusion. I don't have necessarily a really solid sense of self. I don't know, this is who I am, this is what I want. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It depends on your chart. But I find that it's really common for these individuals to have a little bit more of like a porous identity. And sometimes it's hard to stand in the face of adversity and go after what you want, commit to something, and not let thoughts come into your head that make you doubt yourself, that make you feel like you can't, and it takes away some of your action. And so that's something I see really commonly. I don't necessarily know if that's just highly sensitive people or if that's just Neptune, but that's something I just see a lot with my clients and people with a strong Neptune in general. Okay, so now let's go ahead and talk about these 3 actors, and well, 2 actresses, 1 actor, who have considered themselves highly sensitive. Well, 2, they have said it themselves, are very, very sensitive. And then the other one, I'm like, they've got to be high sensitive, and they are. So let's go ahead and jump in. So the first person is Nicole Kidman. So she is a self-identified highly sensitive person. She was actually talking about how to be an actor, it's really difficult because you need to be both sensitive, have strong Neptune, and courageous, because you need to be able to embody that role and step into that emotional experience, but yet be able to be rejected and receive criticism. And that's a very, very hard thing and a very difficult line to toe. And I know that with actors, what I start to see is that they typically have quite a bit of fire and water. They have that Leo energy, that Sagittarius energy, a desire for visibility, for impact, leadership, and then also very sensitive, very emotionally in tune, able to empathize. And because they have both, they can kind of handle a little bit more of the rejection and toe that line. Nicole Kidman herself has Neptune in the first house, which I mentioned is one of the big figures for considering yourself sensitive. And it's also trining her Mercury in Cancer. So we can see her Neptune's in a water sign, her Mercury's in a water sign. So she already has quite a bit of strong water energy here, which again will enhance the emotional capacity. And then on top of that, she has Pluto squaring her moon. And this is also quite difficult emotionally. Like you could feel a little bit overwhelmed by things because of the intensity of it. So both of these things are, again, what makes her highly sensitive. Now let's look at Winona Ryder. She specifically said that she said, I haven't considered suicide, but I definitely have felt like I'm so sensitive for this world, that life is so busy, life is so crazy, there's so much going on, and I feel like I don't belong here. And that was pretty much almost exactly her quote. There's a little bit off there, but I think that many people with a strong Neptune and maybe a strong Aquarius as well can really relate to that feeling of being too sensitive for this world. And that's kind of something I've been trying to iterate here. And so Winona has Neptune in her 12th house, which again can make you sensitive, but it's squaring her moon. And this makes it a little bit harder to kind of assimilate intense emotional experiences. It can kind of feel like it overwhelms you, which again is kind of true for all of these aspects anyway, but especially the square, like hard aspects, are going to make it a little bit less manageable, a little bit harder to function in a day-to-day world. She also has her Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Moon all in water signs. These are almost all of her personal planets in water signs. You can see, again, very emotionally in tune. She also has, if we calculate her elements, like the number for each element, she has 10 water, 8 air, 5 fire, and 0 earth. So again, lots of water, the most water in her chart. We also have Heath Ledger, and I think we can all tell, I mean, maybe not, but why I chose him. And that's because he had a really dark role, and then after it, he died. And I think maybe an overdose or something along those lines. But regardless, it clearly very much affected him to be in somebody else's shoes emotionally as an actor and maybe doing method acting, where they were dark and negative and had all these really big struggles. Like he was clearly very affected by that. And so I assumed that he was a highly sensitive person. And when I looked at his chart, I was like, okay, he definitely is a highly sensitive person. He has Neptune trining the sun. He also has Neptune squaring Mercury. So I see this, I feel like quite a bit with like the Neptune and Mercury, especially with actors, because or even writers, because they are expressing themselves and their sensitivity through their voice. And this is what Neptune really allows us to do, is it allows us to channel our emotions into a creative experience, especially with Mercury. It's like either written or spoken kind of creative experience to channel those difficult feelings. He also has his moon making a sextile to Chiron. So his moon is his emotions, and Chiron is going to sensitize him and empathize him for others' pain. And then he also has a ton of water. So he has 11 water, 7 fire, 4 earth, and 1 air. So you can see he has the most water as well. So all of these individuals are examples of people who are highly sensitive. And I would love to hear in the comments down below what placements you have. If you have lots of the placements I listed, you can definitely see that you probably have even more mirror neurons than other people, and more sensitive than other people. And you might have to learn new tactics in order to be able to function, but also recognize that this is a really strong asset as well. So you have stronger capabilities of intuition, psychic development, all of those things as well. So definitely list that out down below, and I can't wait to offer you guys that limerence video. If you are interested in that, let me know, and I hope that you guys have a great day. Bye.